Hello class. Tonight we're going to be learning about America's entry into World War I. In particular, the years when America was being neutral during the years of 1914, 1917. Before we begin though, there's going to be a picture of a sinking boat in the top left-hand corner of your page. If anyone can find out what the name of that famous boat that sank during the years 1914 and 1917, you can get some extra credit for it. It's a major cause of America joining the Allies in World War I. So the notes tonight that you're going to be writing down: the United States in World War I, August 1914 to April 1917. America at the outbreak of the war. Obviously, we've talked already about the outbreak of the war itself from 1914, 1917, and the horrors that were taking place with trench warfare and the huge cost of life on both sides. America at this time was feeling superior to Europe in every way. All of this senseless deaths that were taking place in Europe for really no cause. There was really no good guy or bad guys we've looked at. The causes of the war were very spurious. So the U.S. Was feeling above Europe at this time. We were not going to get dragged into a senseless war started by a bunch of kings and queens over silly things like imperialism and nationalism. We were above all that. Also at this time, we were the richest nation in the world, which is a great thing, even though the problem is that we need to sell goods to countries at war. It's very difficult to sell those goods to countries that were fighting because of the danger of shipping the goods, and also countries didn't have a lot of money to spend on many goods that we were trying to sell. They only wanted to buy weapons and machinery and uniforms for soldiers. So we wanted to make sure we could continue selling goods at this time to both sides. The United States has a large population, after Russia, the largest in the Western world. This has a huge potential for a very large army. Now, with millions of people dying in the war in Europe, the U.S.'s large potential army was very attractive to both sides. So both sides wanted them to become allies with them. The allies wanted them to join up with them. The Central Powers wanted them to ally with them. And so you have the United States sort of being torn into by the Germans on the one side, and of course the British on the other, and the French and the Russians too. So America was sort of torn between both sides. American sympathies at the beginning of the war are divided. We didn't really feel a clear-cut feeling towards either side. Part of this is because of ethnic loyalties. We are a nation of immigrants, and many immigrants came from all parts of Europe. So there was a large Germanic and Eastern European population that sided with, obviously, the Central Powers. Also, we had a large Irish population in America, which also sided with the Central Powers, because the Irish were against the British at this time period, and so any enemy of the British was a friend of the Irish. On the other side, of course, you have a lot of immigrants from France, Russia, and Britain, and many of those people obviously wanted the United States to side with the Allies. We had two groups of people in the country called the pacifists and the isolationists. The pacifists are people that do not want to fight in wars. Here is a poster saying, "I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier." You see the fighting in the background, the American son at the bottom of the picture being held by his mother. Clearly, many Americans did not want to send their boys over to fight in the useless war of trench warfare. The isolationists we talked about before just wanted to keep America isolated from world events so that we wouldn't be dragged into any wars, and this was a prime example of what they believed in. So both these groups believe that this war is not a noble war and is not any of America's business. On the other side, you have the war hawks, and the war hawks wanted to side up with, take a side in the war to show that America can be a world power. Most war hawks wanted to sign up with the British, in this war because we had more similarities to British as far as government politics, government traditions, obviously the English language, and other types of cultural traditions. Excuse me. So the war hawks were very active in trying to get America involved in the war. So what is the policy of neutrality? The policy of neutrality was begun by President Woodrow Wilson, who wanted to keep us out of war for as long as possible. Didn't want American soldiers to be dying in the senseless slaughter that was taking place overseas. And there were three main parts of this U.S. Neutrality. First, the U.S. would not favor either side in the war. This is the definition of neutrality, not taking sides in a war. The main reason why we wanted to do this was because we wanted to maintain trade with both sides and reap huge monetary benefits. This goes back to the first slide we were looking at tonight, where America was hoping to keep their riches and keep becoming one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. You can't do that if you stop trading with both sides. So America said, well, let's still trade with both sides, and we'll continue to make our money. The neutral policy basically has two parts. Unrestricted trade. So when we are trying to sell our goods to the Central Powers or allies, no one should be able to stop us. And of course, the other side is no loans. Not having loans is very important, because if you give someone a loan, you want them to pay you back. If a side loses in a war, they are probably not going to be able to pay you back those loans. So just by giving a loan, you're sort of hoping that side wins the war. And because of that, American bankers and American politicians said we will not give any loans out. Here's some money. Okay, problems with neutrality. Lots of problems with neutrality, actually. First one is Britain rules the seas. Thus, they can control the trade. We've seen before through the imperialism unit, Britain was the greatest navy in the world this time. They could stop any type of supplies coming through into Europe, especially towards Germany and the Central Powers. There is the flag of Great Britain. And what the British would do is they would start stating that anything that was contraband could be seized. Contraband is basically war materials. And at the beginning of the war, contraband was the things that you would most associate with war. Guns, bullets, uniforms, things like that. As the war dragged on, though, the British started saying that almost anything could be contraband. Cotton, to make clothes and other things. Any type of metals. Food to feed the soldiers. All these things started becoming contraband, and that, of course, got the United States very upset, because this was limiting who and what we could trade with other countries. What the British would do is they would search and seize our ships, which also got us mad, because many of the supplies that we were trying to sell to the Central Powers were very time sensitive. If you're selling a boatload of tomatoes to Germany, if the British searches and seizes your ships and holds them in their British port for, let's say, 2 or 3 months, the tomatoes are going to go bad. And we aren't going to get our money, and the Germans aren't going to obviously pay for those ruined goods. So we were very upset that the British were taking our supplies and holding them there. Keep that in the back of your mind, because in a few seconds we're going to talk about how the British got around having the Americans get so angry at them. Here's a boat up in the top corner that would seize our ships. The other thing would be the British would mine the North Sea and the English Channel. The North Sea is to the obviously northeast of Great Britain. The English Channel is along the southern coast of Britain. These were the two main ways to get to Germany from the north, and they would put these mines in these places, as you can see from the pictures there. If an American ship hit it, they would obviously sink. So for the American ships to go through, we had to stop in Britain to find the proper way through. And of course, if you stop in Britain, then they will seize our ships and take them. The Central Powers thus could not get any of American goods. If you see from this chart here, the United States trade in 1914. We were selling about $825 million of trade with the Allies, much less to the Central Powers, only $170 million. But by the end of the war, the Allies were being sold $3.4 billion worth of goods, whereas the Central Powers went down to a measly $1.7 million in goods. So the Allies were getting tons of supplies, where the Central Powers were getting almost none. Now you might say, well, how are they able to pay for all these things if they did not have the cash to pay for them and they could not take out any loans? It's a great question, and the reason is the U.S. gives the Allies credit instead of loans. Now tomorrow in class, if you have a question about what is the difference between credit and loans, please ask. I'm not going to go into it right now, but tomorrow we will talk about that, so someone hopefully please ask that question. There were no credit was, or very little credit was given to the Central Powers. So if you're the Central Powers and you look at this, you see that the United States becomes the arsenal, which means a weapons supplier, the banker and the warehouse for Britain, France, and all the Allies. And this begs a question that I want you to think about, that we're going to be discussing at the beginning of class tomorrow. Was the United States truly neutral at this time period? Think about it from the Allies' perspective. Think about it from the Central Powers' perspective. Was the United States neutral at this time? I'm going to talk about that. So you might want to jot down, maybe in the column of your notes, a few reasons why they were either neutral or why they weren't neutral. And here's a couple pictures from this. Here's Great Britain in the middle, the big fat guy, and of course the guy to the left is Uncle Sam, and the little crying babies are little boats that are getting beat up at this time. And the British are like, well, we're trying to hit the Germans. And of course, in the other picture with the British boat, they have the American flag flying. Sometimes the British would try to trick the Germans by flying the American flag so they wouldn't get sunk. The last little bit here is submarine warfare, and we're going to go a lot more into that next class period. Here is a picture of a U-boat rising to the surface. U-boats were not very big boats at this time. They were much smaller than, of course, the boat in the upper left-hand corner, and any other type of cargo ships. So they were very small, and that caused two problems. One, the old international law states that during naval war, ships must search and seize neutral ships. Now, this is impossible for U-boats. What I want you to do tonight is think of many reasons why it would be impossible for the smaller U-boats to search and seize these larger cargo ships that were going across, and so why it was impossible for the Germans to follow this international law. The other thing I want you to think about tonight is the Germans would just, instead of searching, they would just start sinking any Allied warships. And of course, the problem with that is that sometimes these ships could sink neutral U.S. ships. Why would that be a problem for U.S. neutrality? Why would that be a problem for Germans trying to keep the U.S. neutral? I want you to think about that question tonight. So the three main questions that I want you to think about tonight: was America truly neutral? Why was it impossible for U-boats to follow the old international laws that were taking place at this time? And of course, why was it difficult to keep America neutral if the Germans follow this policy? Okay, I'll either talk to you tomorrow or next class. Have a good night.